Good morning, everyone. Today is April 10th, 2025, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to present another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. As you probably know, there's no charge for these great presentations. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And every week, one of my favorite parts of the webinar is when we announce the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed since we began the series nearly 5 years ago. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
Oh, with pleasure. Hello, everyone. As of today, at this particular moment, we are happy to announce that we have been told about donations to food banks around the world of a total of $798,243.67. That's almost $800,000. I can see today we'll go over the $800,000 mark probably. Thank you so much for your continued generosity and for being here week in and week out. And thank you so much to our speakers for your time in making this happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. And for those of you who enter trivia games at your local bars and pubs, you'll be the first ones to know that Eric Green is the speaker who put the Will Work for Food project above $800,000. Let's turn to Eric Green, one of the true pioneers of ADR, mediation, dispute resolution as we know it today. Eric is one of the pioneers of ADR in the United States and around the world. He was the co-founder of Endispute, which is now part of JAMS, and Resolutions, LLC. Professor Green graduated from Harvard Law School in 1972 and was awarded the Knox Memorial Traveling Fellowship, which took him to Cambridge University for further legal studies. Professor Green then became an associate and later a partner with the prestigious law firm of Munger, and Olson here in Los Angeles, and then an attorney advisor to the regional director of the Federal Trade Commission. Professor Green specializes in mediating and arbitrating complex, legally intensive, multi-party cases, including securities, financial, intellectual property, antitrust, professional negligence, construction, product liability, mass tort, and all types of class actions. In August 2014, Professor Green was appointed the monitor for the $7 billion consumer relief portion of the RMBS settlement between the DOJ, 6 states, and Bank of America. In 2017, Professor Green was appointed as the special master overseeing the Takata Airbags Resolution Funds and the trustee of the Takata Airbag Tort Compensation Trust Fund. He has also served as special master in numerous other mass torts, including recently ephedra and Fresenius granuflow dialysis cardiac arrests. Professor Green was instrumental in assisting in the establishment of the International Institute for Conflict Prevention and Resolution in New York, CPR, CEDAR in London, and the mediation program in Hong Kong. He's been involved in training mediators and in advising on the development of mediation programs around the world. He was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American College of Civil Trial Mediators, and CPR bestowed upon Professor Green the James F. Henry Award for outstanding contributions to the field of ADR in the year 2010. And today we're going to hear about a fascinating topic, dispute resolution, the stage 3 imperative. Evolution of dispute resolution systems from eye for an eye primitive stage through the adjudicative stage to a higher evolved consensual stage 3. We're going to look at the historical, behavioral, and economic evidence of the mid-stage struggle for advancement through the eyes of a lifelong practitioner and scholar, one of the true leaders in the field, Eric Green. Professor Green, we're so glad you're here. Please tell us a word or two about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're able. And then on with the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Jean. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be your speaker today, and I'm honored to be able to support the Greater Boston Food Bank, which is the most important, largest food bank in our part of the country, and they do such wonderful things. You can find them by looking up Greater Boston Food Bank on the web. We support them, and they're an umbrella for a lot of other food-based organizations in this area. With that in mind, should I start on my topic, Jeff?
Yeah, let's dive right in, Eric.
Okay, so I'm a mediator, and I start with the observation that humans are a competitive, aggressive, jealous, insecure, greedy, and destructive species. We lie, cheat, steal, grab, assault, kill, and make war for food, property, money, prestige, mates. You have it. It's been that way before recorded history, over the millennia of struggle and conflict between and among what we call us and even our evolutionary ancestors. But humans also have the capacity for compassion, cooperation, generosity, empathy, altruism, understanding, and forgiveness. How have the tensions between these competing tendencies played out? And where are we going? This question has immense consequences. As advances in technology, communication, transportation, and intelligence, both innate and artificial, have enabled humankind to develop beneficial products and systems and models, lifting the standard of living for hundreds of millions, it has at the same time enabled humankind to develop weapons of mass destruction and disruption that can annihilate hundreds of millions even faster. Evil exists. I am not so naive to believe that it doesn't. Murderers and other criminals must be stopped by legal force and brought to justice before courts. I'm not talking about that kind of conflict today. But even the most honorable and law-abiding of us are capable, indeed, we have the built-in proclivities, unfortunately, to see objective facts differently and to selectively remember, justify, and rationalize things in our particular favor, so that everyday disputes inevitably arise over practically anything. Was the light green or red? Who got there first? What are the rights, obligations, and duties in a contract or business? Evil is not necessary for conflict. It's the kind of everyday disputes between basically well-intentioned people and entities that I'm focused on. So disputes and conflicts may be an inevitable fact of life, but the question I'm concerned with is, are we getting any better at finding ways of resolving our disputes? From the largest, most dangerous international conflicts to the more mundane local, commercial, and personal conflicts that confront us every day. In other words, are we learning anything about conflict resolution? Are we evolving in a positive direction on this dimension? Is there hope of bettering our processes of handling disputes so we can come up with better outcomes overall in the long run for all of us? I think about these questions every day. In my chosen profession as a mediator of basically large, complex, legally intensive disputes for nearly 50 years, I have had a front row seat in watching how Americans are resolving their disputes over business deals, contracts, property, injuries, investments, construction, environment, you name it. I've had the opportunity to step back as a law professor, way back, and look at the history of human dispute resolution with a very long lens, the lens of all recorded history. So from these two very different perspectives, the current, what I've been doing for 40 years, and a look back through history, I think there is evidence that we are on the cusp of a major transformation in society's approach to one of the basic human problems of conflict and resolution. It's my proposition that at this moment, long moment in evolutionary time, we are in the process of making the third great leap in human conflict resolution from what I will call stage 2 to stage 3. And I think it's imperative that this leap be made. What is this great leap that I am maybe accused of slightly overhyping? It is the evolution of conflict resolution from the age of adjudication, stage 2, to an age of consensus, accommodation, and peaceful, intelligent, cooperative resolutions. Let me briefly explain these stages and their predecessor, stage 1. What I call stage 1 of human conflict resolution consisted of retributive, eye for an eye, maximum violence, death-centric conflict resolution. This is the form of dispute resolution which humans engaged in from the dawn of the species through most of recorded time. It is the form of conflict resolution we see in these great blockbuster movies all the time with gladiators and armies and things like that. The first Western departure to a more advanced form of conflict resolution, adjudication, can be found in the Eumenides, Book 2 of Aeschylus' Oresteia, first performed around 458 BC at the Dionysus festival in Athens. To recite the well-known facts of this case, in the first book of the trilogy, Agamemnon, the king, returns home from a fairly extended overnight in the Trojan Wars. The queen, Clytemnestra, his wife, has taken a lover, Aegisthus, Agamemnon's cousin, and she's planning to murder the king to get the bothersome husband out of the way, and partly in revenge for Agamemnon's sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia. Clytemnestra murders Agamemnon in his bath, and it's looking as if it's going to be blood for blood, big time, kind of like the Godfather trilogy. After all, the ancient law of the Erinyes mandated blood for blood. Vengeance is just, the chorus tells us. Sure enough, in the second book of the trilogy, Agamemnon's son Orestes avenges the murder of his father by murdering both his mother, Clytemnestra, and her co-conspirator and lover, Aegisthus. More and more, blood for blood. But in the third book of the trilogy, the Furies pursue and capture Oresteia. But here's where the surprise plot twist turns. Instead of more blood for blood, Athena rescues Orestes and brings him before a jury of 11 Athenians, plus herself. Hence, a jury of that very odd number, 12, to judge Orestes' guilt. Athena votes last, and her vote produces a tie, which according to the rules laid down by Athena results in a hung jury. In the first recorded trial, a hung jury, because mercy trumps justice. The verdict is accepted even by the Furies, who are led to a new abode, meaning venerable ones, as they will now, with this change from blood justice to trial justice, assure the prosperity of the city. The curse of the house of Atreus is broken. Athena leaves its barbaric systems of vengeance and Vedas behind and embraces a new system of civilized trials, 458 BC. Prior to this, and prior to the rise of the rule of law and the world reign of adjudication, the ideology of dispute resolution, if you could use that term for that time and manner, was based on brute force, vengeance, punishment, blood violence, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This characterized dispute resolution everywhere in our Bible, tribal stories. It was the models. That's why I call it stage 1 of dispute resolution. It ruled for thousands of years until it was replaced in part and in theory by the idea of law and adjudication. what I call the dawn of stage 2 conflict resolution, 2,500 years ago. Stage 2 took hold in Western civilizations. From the age of Athens through the Roman and Byzantine world and the ecclesiastic courts of the church, and speeded on by the Enlightenment and the Napoleonic Code, Magna Carta, and the growth of the English common law, adjudicatory processes have spread, evolved, and developed into the modern legal systems that exemplify and administer the rule of law in every developed modern free society, and even those that may not be so free. And the trial in one form or another has always been at the center of this system of conflict resolution, at least symbolically, if not numerically, and in the popular mind. While the civil jury trial may have been phased out entirely in England and has declined precipitously in the United States, it is still the iconic image of our system of conflict resolution. We all grew up with Perry Mason, Inherit the Wind, Young Abe Lincoln, and whatever was then the current version of The Good Wife, trials. Our trial system in the United States, state and federal, are all organs of a pervasive and fabulously successful system of conflict resolution. But as successful as stage 2 has been, of course, it never really eliminated stage 1, blood for blood conflict resolution in other parts of the world, let alone in the purportedly more advanced developed world. Stage 1 still dominates in many parts of the world. All you have to do is open up the newspaper, watch the daily news about Gaza, Syria, Ukraine, Sudan, Congo, Pakistan, Afghanistan, to name just a few examples. Vigilantism and blood justice still occur even in the most highly developed stage 2 societies. Gangs, extremist groups, organized criminal enterprises, ruthless con artists still practice stage 1. Romeo and Juliet, in its modern adaptation West Side Story, are classical, fictional depictions that still ring true. I'm sad to say the so-called stand your ground gun laws are part of that too. The truth is that the evolution from stage 1 to stage 2 has been a long, arduous, and still incomplete process of human evolution and development. There's constant regression to stage 1. But as stage 2 continues its evolutionary struggle for adoption and expansion, we see it in greater access to justice movements in the United States and development even of international courts like the Court of Criminal Justice, bringing stage 1 war criminals to answer in stage 2. But as we see the fall of the adjudicatory model, and we see it in the almost elimination of adjudication, as some scholars have said it, the decline of trials to a scant percentage of cases brought, we have to ask ourselves, what's happening? I could quote you statistics over the last 50 years that show a steady decline of actual trials, both in federal and state courts, and a change in the manner of trials, and a change in the model of the judge as an umpire presiding over a trial between adversaries to a manager of conflict resolution. The great scholar Mark Galanta has studied this and made numerical observations for decades. So as we see the decline and perhaps extinction of the core of the adjudicatory system, what does this mean on a grand scale? Is it an early slide back into stage 1? Is it an inevitable explosion of stage 2 as it refines itself to become so precious and priceless and expensive that it can't sustain itself? Or is something else going on? Well, I think there's an alternative and more optimistic explanation. And I think our most advanced societies are moving towards a system of conflict resolution where the adjudicatory stage is being replaced by a better system as we evolve into stage 3, what I call the consensual or cooperative stage of conflict resolution. In the United States, we see the near takeover of dispute resolution by mediation and settlement over trial. I'm talking about civil cases, the meat and potatoes of conflicts between us as people and in businesses. Initiated, developed, and pushed mostly by creative pioneers outside of courts and existing legal institutions, mediations, arbitrations, mini trials, and other forms of ATR are today the modal, the standard form of resolution of legal disputes embraced by courts, clients, and all segments of the law. The world of litigation has changed into a world of mitigation, borrowing from Galanter's earlier coined phrase of litigation. In my own professional lives, I have seemed to have evolved from being regarded as a radical, revolutionary, experimental young ADR pioneer into just one of thousands of gray-haired, workaday mediator, old farts who are just mediating day in and day out as the standard model. In 50 years, this has occurred in the legal system. Judges go to amazing lengths to avoid trials by erecting almost insurmountable barriers to the courtroom and mandating diversionary chutes to out-of-court resolution processes. So, is this a good thing or a bad thing? What's going on now? Are we losing something that is critical in reliance on the adjudicatory phase? Or are we moving towards something better? Suppose stage 2 is not the end of the evolution of human conflict resolution, but only one stage in a much longer evolutionary process that will lead us to even better and more successful human conflict resolution. Suppose stage 2, adjudication, turns out to only have been a long and positive transitional, but not the final stage. Perhaps the decline and disappearance of the trial is not a negative indicator, but an early sign that humans are evolving towards a higher, more useful and productive form of conflict resolution that is not based on adversarial adjudication, but is based more on collaboration, cooperation, consensus, agreement, reconciliation, compromise, our better angels, as Lincoln said. Now, in stage 3, adjudication will not disappear. But in stage 3, it should be rarely needed because shared values and norms, enlightened self-interest balanced with a sense of community, and yes, the rule of law, are strong enough so that people, institutions, and governments can resolve conflict themselves, even without resort to judges and adjudication, or with adjudication reduced to the backstop to be avoided necessary evil. In stage 3, there'll be even fewer trials because trials will be largely replaced by mediatory and negotiation-based conflict resolution. In other words, perhaps the trial is nearing the end of its 2,500-year-long run from the Eumenides to today, because in many societies and places we have found something even better. Something in evolutionary terminology is more successful than adjudication. I think to answer these questions, we need to look outside of the box of the legal and even the mediation literature and world. I think if we look more broadly to research being done in the field of evolutionary biology, game theory, strategy, behavioral economics, they may have something to tell us about why stage 3 is gaining greater traction over stage 2. I've taken a long look at the game theoretical work of Robert Axelrod and the social evolutionary work of the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. And if you look at their work, there is considerable evidence that humans are capable of moving towards a outcome better, more cooperative system of conflict resolution through iterated experience with strategic options. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about Axelrod's work with the prisoner's dilemma and Dawkins' work with social evolutionary biology to explain what I have learned from looking at these different methodologies. Jeff, is this a good time to see if there are any
Yeah.
questions from anybody?
It's terrific. If anybody has a question, you can either type it into the chat or simply unmute yourself and pose your question. Eric, let me ask a question. Do we have almost an ethnocentric view of what's going on, being mediators and mediating every day? Do we just exist in an ocean of mediation and we think that it's taking over the world, when I still talk to many lawyers in AmLaw 200 firms, local firms, who say they hardly ever mediate, they don't know any mediators. Is it really as ubiquitous, or is it just that we live in that world?
Well, I think it's true. We live in that world. And of course, where you sit depends on what you see. So that's quite possible. That's part of it. But I know tons of lawyers. Many in my family are lawyers, and I work in a very legally intensive way. And if you ask them, how many trials have you had in the past 5 years? And what do you think the chances are of the cases that you have of actually going to trial as opposed to being settled? What I hear and see is that they expect almost every case, to be settled. Now, there may be some pre-trial adjudication that goes on, motion practice, and things like that. But even though we read about trials that are very much in the news, numerically, they are, and the evidence from all the tracked by the federal judicial system and the state courts, is that the number of actual trials is so far down from what it was 50 years ago. It's down by a factor of 25, that it's disappearing. And mediation is now, in my experience, become the expected modal form of resolution that lawyers go through. But it's very much, it's not black or white in the entirety. It's a shift, it's a movement, but it doesn't, I think, eliminate all this legal activity.
And then why, Eric, what I see in the world of continuing legal education, the kinds of seminars that lawyers and bar associations put on, there's lots and lots: how to win a trial, how to do a great opening statement and closing argument, how to cross-examine experts, and this sort of thing. And infinitely fewer continuing education programs on how to work collaboratively with mediators, and how to prepare your clients for their role in mediation. Why is your perception the same? And why then has the legal profession not stepped up its frequency and sophistication of training for its members in how to do well in mediations?
Well, that's a good question. I still do a lot of training and speaking at programs and for continuing legal education credit on ADR and mediation. I do a lot of that. But you're right. And why is it? It's because we're slow to change in what we're used to doing. And besides that, people don't really know how to train people to engage in mediation better. There's still some sort of an attitude that there's nothing real, there's no real skill there. that to train and develop. You either have it comes naturally or it doesn't. You're either a good negotiator or you aren't. And there's still a lot of confusion that mediation is just a kind of milder form of litigation. And so we have all these lovely federal rules of evidence, which I taught for 30 years and came to love, and rules of procedure, which I also came to love the nuances of, and we can spend hours training on. But in fact, um, when it comes to what people actually do, they're not very useful. I am delighted when I run into my former students. I have former students from evidence, and I have former students from my ADR class, which I pioneered the first class in dispute resolution and mediation in law schools. And so it's a relatively new thing in the scheme of things, okay? And I run into my ADR students, and they tell me, oh, Professor Green, I had you for ADR back in 1983. It was the best and most useful class I ever had. You know, I don't get that from my evidence students as much. From my evidence students, I didn't really learn anything about evidence in your class. Okay. You know, it's not what happens in the courts. I've been in court once or twice, and nobody talks about the rules of evidence or things like that. I don't know. There's this disconnect there, Jeff, that I can't explain. But
Okay.
I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about Axelrod's work with the prisoner's dilemma and then how that led to Dawkins. I think many of you are familiar with the prisoner's dilemma game. It's a deceptively simple game that's fascinated economists and other scholars for decades. And it cleverly models strategic choice in dispute resolution. So it may have something to say about what we're talking about today. So here's how the game's classically played. In the initial format, two prisoners are in jail. They're suspected of collaborating in a crime or a series of crimes. Each prisoner is isolated in a separate cell. They can't speak to each other, and they're offered a chance. Betray your colleague by defecting on him and turn state's evidence. Okay? Or if you want, exercise your rights to not say anything. What happens to each prisoner depends on what each of them do, but neither knows what the other prisoner is going to do. That's the dilemma. If prisoner A defects on prisoner B by admitting his guilt and throwing most of the blame on B, and then B renders A story plausible by remaining silent and not defecting on A, then B gets convicted of the main crime and receives a very heavy sentence. That's the sucker's payoff. Okay. A escapes scot-free thanks to his cooperation with the authorities and his betrayal of B. However, it's vice versa for B. He has the same decision to make as A. However, if each betrays the other by defecting against his collaborator, both get convicted of the crime. They receive some credit for betraying the other by cooperating with the authorities, and thus get a somewhat reduced but still substantial sentence. And that's the punishment for mutual defection. But if neither party defects on the other, neither yields to the temptation by refusing to speak, there's not enough evidence to convict either of the main serious crimes, and they receive a very short sentence or for a lesser offense, or even get off scot-free. Each prisoner must choose what to do: betray their conspirator or cooperate with the other prisoner. But each prisoner cannot speak to the other and cannot be sure what to do. If you analyze your choices in this prisoner's dilemma, not knowing what the other prisoner is going to do, every option tells you to betray your collaborator, because you're going to get a better result than your collaborator, whatever your collaborator does. If you can only speak to each other and stick together, not betray your partner in crime, you would have, in the long run, a better payoff for both of you. Now, this prisoner's dilemma has been modified to a numerical format where the payoffs are still in a similar rank order. I could describe this in great detail, but it would take too much time. But game theorists love this pure game because the perfectly rational set of behaviors is to betray your collaborator. But if you both do that, you both get bad results in the long run, not the worst. The only way out of this dilemma is to figure out a way that you can signal your collaborator to remain silent as you will. But under the classic prisoner's dilemma, it's a one-off negotiation and there's no opportunity to collaborate. Game theorists have taken this game and what they've done is they've decided to run it over many iterations, one after the other, choice after choice after choice after choice, with the payoffs being known after each choice to the participants. So you can play this 10 times. In my classes in negotiation, I play it 10 times, 10 rounds, and students see the results after each round. After a few rounds, they begin to see that the wise choice is to cooperate if the other side is cooperating. And if they can somehow instill that into the behavior, the prisoners will do better. Axelrod decided to run this game as a tournament for game strategists. And he invited some of the most clever game theorists in the world to play this game. And he ran it with 14 contestants, plus what he called a random strategy, played randomly. They all played each other and they all played themselves. The winning strategy after 225 rounds of this game turned out to be the simplest and on the surface, the least ingenious. It turned out to be tit for tat. It had only 2 rules as you play 225 rounds. First, begin by cooperating on the first move. Begin by being what he called nice, cooperative. And then, on succeeding rounds, play whatever the other player played on the previous round. 2 rules, tit for tat. Start nice, but be provocable. Tit for tat didn't win many individual matches, but it was far and away the winner in the long run, as the iterative nature of the game taught the other players what would be the best result, the highest payoff results for each of them in the long run. So tit for tat was nice, it was provocative, but it was also forgiving, because if the other side defected on it, it would defect in the next move. But then if the other side went back to being cooperative, tit for tat went back to being cooperative, always went back to being cooperative. It prevented, therefore, what I have called the spiral of doom, where competitors in a conflict each come out competitive and provocative, and that's what they signal to the other side. So Axelrod was surprised by this result. He published his results. They were widely published, and he decided he'd run a second tournament having the results from the first tournament published. This time he got 62 entries by game theorists, obviously all designed to do better than the former champion tit for tat. Some real nasties in terms of strategies were submitted. Double surprise. The defending champion tit for tat successfully defended its championship and won again. So Axelrod said we might be able to learn something about this. And Richard Dawkins, the great evolutionary biologist, provided many examples from what he observed in nature and in human behavior, from the cellular level to the movement of troops, and applied the core components of tit for tat to many of those decisions. And he observed that a cooperative strategy was the evolutionarily stable strategy that produced better results. That a strategy that started cooperative and rewarded cooperation would, in the long run, not beat every opponent it came to, but in the long run would do better than any other strategy. But for this to happen, the strategy has to become learnable, and it has to become numerous in a population. So he ran these experiments over and over again. And when he did it in his laboratory, he paid off winners not with points or prison terms, but he paid off winners with offspring. More cooperative strategies. The strategy that had been successful got replicated. As he ran this on computers, with the longer-term winners being paid off in offspring, their environment became more stable and more successful in the long run. It was not immune to strategies that were designed to take advantage of it. Sometimes that would happen, and the nastier strategy would prevail. But the nastier strategy, if it prevailed and got paid off with nasty offspring, would soon consume itself. There was a hidden tunnel underneath the two choices, which gave the cooperative strategy an advantage over the nasty strategy. And once the nasties were driven into extinction, what actually happened was that all the successful strategies pretty much were indistinguishable from tit for tat because they started with cooperation, and since they were all cooperative, they cooperated with each other for the rest of the way. They are invadable, successful strategies, but in a stable environment, they can take root and be more successful. Of course, there are problems with anthropomorphizing tit for tat as a strategy when it applies to humans. I recognize that. Okay. And one of the threats to a successful cooperative strategy, it turns out, is envy. Envy in the sense of not caring whether the other player scores as much or even more than you, or winning one particular game. It is beating whoever is across the table, no matter what it costs you. That is a human behavior that I think we all encounter, and mediators we encounter in our work all the time. Virtually all humans are prone to envy when they're presented with choices to cooperate or compete. So getting humans to understand that in the long run, life is not a zero-sum game, and that envy is not a durable strategy for the long run is a major challenge to conflict resolvers. So the lessons from their research: iterated interactions, time, and culture are critical to devising and maintaining a positive cooperative strategy, are very important to us. There needs to be in interactions what Axelrod called the shadow of a future encounter in some form or another. He compared behavior in that game to the live and let live behavior of troops in the trenches in World War I, where they took, without any communication whatsoever, a tacit pause in hostilities over the Christmas holidays, without saying anything, and against the commands of their officers. A tacit agreement of cooperation developed between the troops facing each other, where they didn't fire. And there was the shadow of future interactions between them that allowed that to take root. Dawkins, being an environmental behaviorist, also describes cooperative behavior without communication, as we see it, between hyenas hunting in packs, emperor penguins huddling together, fish and birds swimming and flying in formation, taking turns in the lead, kamikaze bees and cleaner fish, the fig tree and the fig wasp, all unconsciously cooperating. Dawkins sees it in human blood donors, and he sees it in the blood sharing behavior by vampire bats. So he has a pretty broad canvas on which he's looking at things. So I developed this at greater length in a paper, but I suggest that the decline of the trial to near extinction and its replacement with more cooperative forms of ADR may be attributable, at least in part, to the steady socially evolutionary establishment of more successful, cooperative, provocable but forgiving, non-envious, robust, and eventually stable and dominant forms of conflict resolution. Perhaps it's an indication of the continuing evolution over generations of human conflict resolution through the always defect strategy of stage one, through the still adversarial, often zero-sum mentality of stage two, to the more mutually cooperative strategy of stage three. Maybe it will become a stable system. Perhaps the vanishing trial and the rise of ADR are signs of stage three offspring, slowly spreading, multiplying, and leading us in the direction of the underground passage under the knife edge to a stage three era. Maybe this has become strategic in the more successful of those of us who engage in dispute resolution. Other causes for the decline of adjudication may exist, including that it's perfected itself into obsolescence. It's like Yogi Berra says about a famous night spot: nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. Maybe it's because of the feminization of the legal system in the last 25, 50 years. with less testosterone and more nurturing. Maybe it's because ADR processes produce more successful outcomes and it's noticed than trials. All of these may contribute to an evolutionary progression to a new, better stage of conflict resolution. So, if this is right, what does it mean for the rule of law? The rule of law is a rock for us. But adjudication is not the same thing as the rule of law. You don't need a system dominated by adjudication to have a rule of law. I think stage 3 is still dependent on a rule of law and a system of norms, even though there are fewer trials. I think it's necessary, the rule of law too, because this is not a uniform progression in conflict resolution. Sadly, tragically, we experience all stages of dispute resolution at the same time. Adjudication is necessary to preserve as a preventative towards slippage into stage 1. But I don't think it should be a barrier or impediment to improvement from stage 2 to stage 3 either. While we may need some effective method of punishment and retaliation to police ourselves against the most evil and wrongful actors in our society. And since stage 1 methods of conflict resolution are unfortunately still rampant, we need to foster the reproduction of stage 2 as well as stage 3 systems. But I hope that what I call the stage 3 model continues to grow and spread and more replace the need for our wonderfully successful system of stage 2 adjudication. But stage 2 is not the end. Okay. I think as we deal with greater dangers in the world, moving towards stage 3 is an existential imperative. And I think we can preserve the rule of law while at the same time shifting to a more consensus-based cooperative model of conflict resolution. Each of us has to decide what role we'll play in conflict resolution and dispute resolution. Strategies are necessary. All of you who are interested in and have devoted your professional lives and maybe your personal lives to dispute resolution and conflict resolution should take pride in the strategies and choices you have made. And as I think back on what I've done, I don't necessarily think of the high-profile, very expensive, costly, big numbers disputes that I've resolved, billions of dollars of disputes or this or that. I really go to bed at night thinking, have I contributed anything in the long term to the advancement of the human approach to conflict resolution, even at this rather mundane day-to-day level that I operate in? I hope you do too.
Eric, that's fantastic. Thank you. That's a level of analysis and thoughtfulness that we rarely see. We really appreciate this. Let me ask you a real, just nitty-gritty, down and dirty question. So I understand very well that in game theory, the tit-for-tat strategy does not create a sense of a margin of victory but it does create greater wealth or greater utility for all involved. And that's the pitch for the collaborative strategy, greater utility and wealth for all involved. So you're in a mediation and somebody says, well, this is like an okay deal for me, but those other people down at the other end of the hall, they're too happy. There's too much for them. They're not suffering the way they deserve to suffer. We get varieties of this all the time. It's not enough that I win, they have to lose. So they are not really bought into the idea that they could actually have greater wealth or utility themselves if only they would stop comparing themselves to the folks down the hall. What are some practical things that you do in those nitty-gritty moments to get people to evolve?
So
To
you've described a very common phenomenon. It comes under the label of envy in Dawkins' approach to this. And sometimes it's not just punishing people on the other side. Oftentimes I see it among co-defendants. Okay, they're more interested in knowing how much they're paying compared to their co-defendant than they are vis-a-vis the plaintiff. Okay, I see this.
Yes,
Okay,
all the time, all the time.
looking over their shoulders at others. Well,
Right.
it's a failure of analysis on their part. It's emotion and envy and other kind of attributes coming out. And I try always rationality first. I try to get them to calm down and think about what their interests are, what their objectives are, how much better they're doing as opposed to the alternatives for them, and focus on what's in it for them, not how much the other side is suffering or how so much somebody else is paying. I try to keep that. I try to have a very rational discussion with them. And
So excuse me, Eric, what would you actually say? Give us a practical tool.
so, what is your interest here? Is this resolution that's being offered in your interest as opposed to all your other options? Is it the best result or is it the least worst result? Don't look at the other side for a second. Let's look at you and what's in your interest. And maybe I go back and I remind them of some of the choices and options during the whole negotiation and dispute resolution and how it could have gone, how it went, and compare it to what they could hope to achieve if they went in a different direction.
And excuse me, Eric, then what if somebody says, we're in these construction cases, we have these other insurance companies all the time, we see them all the time, and this one group down the hall, they're always nickel and diming me, and they're always getting that extra 5 or 10% at the end, and I'm sick and tired of it. I want to put an end to that. I'm putting my foot down. What do you
And
say to those people?
okay, and how are you gonna make that happen? Okay. I could say I understand. I will empathize with them probably and make sure they understand that I understand that concern, and maybe I will even go more and tell them I think there's a valid concern there. But in this particular case, here are your choices. Okay. And if you want to extract punishment or retribution against them, you can't get that in mediation. Okay. You probably can't get that through negotiation. Okay. So I just kind of keep talking to them to try to get them to see that while they may have a valid point of view or and a valid concern, it just may not be anything that can be done in this negotiation, this mediation about that.
And then, Eric, when people think about compromise, they often couple it with the word unprincipled. And they say, I'm not going to act against my principles here. How do you deal with that?
I say I value principles I recognize principles. Let's talk about your principles. I want to hear about them and where they come from and so forth. And then I say, well, you can't always, um, 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 you can't always get a solution that are perfectly in line with your principles. This is a pragmatic um, process, and it's one in which both sides are likely to have principles, competing principles. I may point out competing principles, and where some compromise on the outcome is necessary in order to get an overall resolution that's good for you or your those for whom you're a fiduciary, your stakeholders. And sometimes you could say you don't have to sacrifice your principles, keep your principles, but you may have to make a compromise in terms of the outcome in this particular case. I am highly skeptical oftentimes of the principles approach that I hear from the people I'm mediating with. Lots of times it's just sometimes it's just a cover for an unprincipled demand. And I try to emphasize to people, this is, if you really want to stand on your principles, again, there is a different process for that. It's a costly, risky, uncertain process, but it is available to you, and I'll respect you if that's where you decide to go. But you might be disappointed in how it turns out.
Yeah. Professor Eric Green, our time is up. I know that there are other people with questions. I know they can email you, Resolutions LLC website. They can get to you with their questions. I'm sorry we don't have time for that. Our time is up. Eric, you have truly demonstrated your wisdom and your insights, why you really are one of the pilgrim fathers of mediation, to use Brandeis's term. And I know that many people will be contributing to the Greater Boston Food Bank. That's the most important thing of all. www.gbfb.org. That's www.gbfb.org. Please contribute. Let us know you've done so. And I'm quite confident that, Eric, you will be the speaker who will go down in history as having put the Will Work for Food project over the $800,000 mark. We appreciate your insights greatly. Thank you so much. And with that, we are complete.
Thank you.